Somebody wrote in and said, how do you get a balance between family and work? I had to be really honest. You have to kind of push and pull and fail. I wish I could help somebody out and say, here's the secret formula. There is no secret formula. The secret formula is to do it to the best of your ability and learn as you go. You just got to push the boundaries. You've got to work as hard as you can and try to do everything to the best of your ability, and you will get overwhelmed and things will go wrong. That's how you learn.
Welcome to the Plugged In podcast by Sweetwater. I'm your host, Mitch Gallagher. This time out, we'll settle into the control room in Sweetwater's Studio A for an in-depth conversation with engineer, producer, musician, and YouTube personality Warren Huart. If you're at all interested in creating music or working in a recording studio, then Warren's channel, Produce Like a Pro, is must-see viewing. For this podcast, we're going to go behind the scenes and talk with Warren about a wide range of topics, including his history, how he got into music and recording, and much more. Now, Warren's usually the one leading the conversation, so it's going to be a lot of fun to turn the tables and focus the interview on him and how he does what he does. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Plugged In podcast by Sweetwater. Settle in and let's get started. Warren, it's great to have you here. Thanks for stopping by the Plugged In podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you back here at Sweetwater.
It's always great being here. This is our third visit. Feel very honored to be welcomed back with open arms.
Jump us back to the beginning. Obviously, I'm familiar with the channel, Produce Like a Pro, all the wonderful things that you do, but I'm not real familiar with your background. Tell us how you kind of got started and got rolling into all this.
How far do you want to go back?
All the way.
Oh, Jesus, Mary, Joseph. Okay, I was born in a village called Crookham Village. The nearest town was Fleet in Hampshire, and that is, it's southeast England, but it's southwest of London, but very close. I mean, you could get into London in, 45 minutes on the slow train, I think 20 minutes on a fast train in the mornings. So it was quite idyllic when I think about it, because I had walked through fields to go to school, but then you could go up into London with your friends and be right in central London in no time at all.
All right.
And I don't know about you, I love trains. So it was a great life. I think one of the things, and I've talked about this a lot, so you start piecing together puzzles. One of the things that I think was really, really important is that the nearest town, Fleet, had a music store. And for those British people, they'll probably remember this, called Kingfisher Music. And long gone, unfortunately. But the great thing about it is it really helped the music scene. Much like when you come here and you've got like your academy, and we were here later last night, and there was tons of parents arriving with kids and going in and doing music lessons. I remember one of my earliest memories, I was little, well before I actually played music, but I was still fascinated by the fact that there was this great music store in the nearest town. And I remember going in there, and there was a Telecaster on the wall, and it had a sticker, and it said, "Sold Queen Productions." And Queen were, and still are, my favourite band. So I looked and I saw that, and I thought, that's pretty cool. And then that was on a Saturday. I was off from school. Thursday evening, I turned on Top of the Pops, and there is Brian May playing that guitar.
With that telescope.
Yeah. And I think it's those kinds of things that were just so powerful. And eventually I ended up working there when I was still at school, working there on a Saturday. So I'd work there Saturdays, just when I first started getting into playing music. And I remember just huge things, like one Saturday, John Deacon came in with his son. And, it was back in the days in the 80s where he had the throw, And he came in, and of course, me being super shy and awkward and didn't know what to say, I said to his son, "Do you want to be a bass player like your dad?" And he was like, "No, I want to be a drummer," like this. And they're all like walking around looking at drums and stuff like that. So I remember Gary Newman pulling up outside in a Ferrari, and a girl running in to pick up a keyboard that he had bought, that he'd called in and bought over the phone. And just those kinds of things when you're a little kid are just like, whoa.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So I think it's one of the things I'm drawn to here is that kind of experience, that there are still music stores, and it's not entirely online. Look, don't get me wrong, I love the convenience. We all do if I want to buy a microphone that I don't need to look at, and I know what it is, and you guys have it, I'm not going to fly to Indiana to buy it here. I'm going to just order it from you.
Right.
But to have this experience, and come into a store Like we were talking about on a video earlier, we were talking about, your headphone rack where you've got like 40 pairs of headphones all playing the same song.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just reference the most expensive to the cheapest and everywhere in between and really get a feel for the quality and the value for money, and be able, something tangible. You can pick it up and feel the build quality.
Right.
That's massively unusual. I don't remember having that kind of opportunity before. Only as a guitar player being able to pick up guitars from the wall. But anyway, that was a big part of my development. I didn't grow up in a musical family in as much as that nobody else played music in my family. But my father being a painter and a sculptor meant that the arts were hugely important to us.
Mm-hmm.
I got to go to Covent Garden, I got to see opera and classical music, and my house was full of classical music and jazz. But my dad, being the big musical snob that he was, meant, and in a good way, meant that the handful of pieces of pop or rock that were allowed to be played were all the best of the best.
Right.
He had, from when he was younger, the Moody Blues. So I got to hear Nights in White Satin because it was orchestrated. He loved that.
Mm-hmm.
Tubular Bells he loved. So he had that in his collection. And most powerfully, Night of the Opera. And the Night of the Opera, when I was a little kid, he gave it to me for Christmas and said to me, "This is worthy." And I just remember being like putting on these huge, 1970s oversized Sony headphones.
Right.
You remember those kinds of things. And just listening to like side one of A Night of the Opera, maybe, 100 times before I even turned it over. It would take weeks before you turn it over. And looking at all the lyrics and then reading that. Remember on the Queen albums in those days, it would say no synthesizers.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that all of this complex and incredible kind of music I was hearing was all created with guitars. So at that point, and looking at pictures of like the band and seeing how crazy hair and, I was like, I don't know what this is, but I want to do that.
Right.
I want to do that. So that's my first memory of like, I suppose, rock music.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very powerful. But I didn't start playing music until I was 16 years old. I had a massive collection of records, like 400 albums by the time I was 16.
Wow.
I used to take my pocket money. I got a paper round, which was 7 miles long. I was nuts in those days. Got a paper round. I lied and said I was 13 when I was 11 so I could get the paper round. And it became a means to an end. I bought my bike in a catalogue, Littlewood's catalogue, for anybody who remembers what that is. So I'd have to send off money every week.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing the paper round to pay for the bicycle and also make an extra couple of pounds a week so I could buy albums. And I did this thing for years where I'd always buy whatever the number one single was that week. So it's very eclectic, to say the least.
Yeah.
And of course, if I had it two or three weeks in a row, I could pick something else in the top 10. It was just an amazing kind of thing. I mean, there's a value to it, But as my father was a painter and a sculptor, there wasn't a lot of money around. So when I said I wanted a guitar, there wasn't really much we could do. So he was working in London sometimes doing illustrations for magazines, back when they used to hire people to do that.
Right.
And he was coming home, walking from the IPC offices. If anybody knows where that is, that was opposite on Savile Row to where the Beatles played. My father actually sat in IPC and watched the Beatles on top of the Apple building in Savile Row.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
I don't think he was interested. That was so funny. I think he was, I wasn't, I obviously have no memory of that, but he was telling me, I remember those long-haired guys, but it's just all very, just comical, because by the time my father died, he had long hair and a long beard. That's a whole other story. Anyway, he was coming home from IPC and he was walking down that area and he saw like a skip. I don't know what you call them over here, but like a big trash bin.
Yeah.
And he saw what seemed to be like a big piece of wood sticking out the back. So he goes down there. My father was very much like that, and pulls out a chopping board, a huge like mahogany chopping board that frankly had bloodstains in it and huge like.
It had been used.
That was that ended up becoming the body of my guitar.
Oh, wow.
So he cut out a Les Paul shape and he carved the top. Couldn't quite get rid of all of the chops in the wood. But then built a neck, bought some of the hardware. I don't think he was able to build. I think we bought Schaller machine heads, and in true Brian May style, built the first guitar that I had.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it's sort of a nod to two things. I was also, Brian May was my hero at the time and still is, And so I had that same experience with a father building a guitar I say with, but when you read Brian talk about it, he admits that his father did the heavy lifting. It was the same for me.
Right.
It was more my father going, sand that, that was my contribution. He was obviously the main guy. So that's a huge part of it. So it's interesting because at the time, I don't know what your experiences were with your parents, but my father was incredibly strict, like very, very strict, and very, very particular about art and how it had to be at the highest level and the highest quality, and the music had to be there, everything. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it was a little bit annoying, when you're a kid and you want to rebel. Right. I would buy albums. I remember even just buying a Police album and being told that it was awful, But now I look back at it and I'm like, what a blessing that I grew up with, classical music, that I knew about Brahms and Beethoven and Debussy and Bach and Mozart and blah, 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 the list, Shostakovich and Tchaikovsky, all of that I grew up, it was in my blood. But it did mean I was a little bit odd because I would go to school and I didn't really connect initially with the other kids that were into all of this, modern pop music, which I did not hear. And I remember my first music lesson, I think it was Mrs. White was our teacher, our music teacher. And there was a big TV show on in the 70s and 80s called The Oneidian Line. And it was about tall ships. And I'm a little kid. And they play the theme tune for The Oneidian Line. And they said, can anybody tell us what this music, what is this music? So, of course, every hand in the class goes up. And teacher picks, Johnny and says, Johnny, what's the music? Says, it's music from the Oneidian Line. All the hands go down. Except for me, hands still up. Yes, Warren. That's Spartacus by Khataturian. That's a little-known Armenian composer from the turn of the century. It was just like, everybody's looking at me like, you're one of those. Right. Yeah. So it did make me a little odd. I thought I was just answering the question right, but soon realized not every kid knew stuff like that. But I really do think it's a blessing. What made me odd and nerdy at the time now is what fuels this sort of passion and love for what we get to do.
Right. That's so awesome.
Yeah.
That's so awesome.
What about you?
So, I come from a small town in North Dakota.
Yeah.
So there was not a lot of music around, but my mother and her sisters, when they were little kids, would do, my grandfather would take them out and they'd do little singing things. They were called the Freed Sisters. And they do like 3-part harmony on When the Red, Red Robin Comes, blah, blah, blah. They do this whole thing. And they actually recorded a single.
Lovely.
The Red, Red Robin and I think Mr. Sandman on the reverse side. So there was a little bit of music there. But my mother and father were very much made sure that we played music. I was in the boys' choir. Started playing trombone, when I was 10, and
that's incredible.
All through high school. But I didn't get into playing guitar, similar to you, till actually I was 16.
Yeah,
same kind of thing. Worked in my dad's plumbing shop in the summer to save up enough money to buy a Encore Les Paul copy off the wall at the music store, and
nice,
off and running. And here we are today.
Yeah, I have an affinity and a love for certain inexpensive things, and one of the reasons why we started the YouTube channel and just in general sort of education like that was to sort of really level the playing field. Also, I felt like there was a lack when we started of anything connecting it. Mm-hmm. Dave Pensado had a very big, successful channel in those days, and Graham Cochran had Recording Revolution. She had Pensado's place, Recording Revolution. And I felt like the one was completely catered towards beginners and getting people started, and one was definitely like interviewing really incredibly successful people. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, where's the bit that crosses over? And I felt like my journey was, although unique for the time, which it was because I didn't have any formal training whatsoever, and all the success that I had was completely self-made, and all the equipment that you saw, the SSL, and all the racks stuff was all bought from working in music. I didn't. Mm-hmm. My parents were poor, to say the least. So I felt like my journey at that point was like exactly what people have to do now.
Right.
There are still studios, of course. There are still music schools. There are all this kind of stuff. But the reality is, for most people, that is not an option. Mm-hmm. So it's changed quite dramatically. But as we know, even looking around here where we see lots of expensive gear, interspersed is a lot of very, very affordable equipment that anybody can get. And as you and I have spoken about many times before, I mean, a pair of $300 speakers, $100, $200 interface, $100 microphone, whatever. With whatever computer you've got, Mac, PC, it doesn't matter. You're making music for well under $1,000 these days.
That should not be the limitation.
Yeah. When I was a kid, even demo studios were in the hundreds. Mm-hmm. So like 2 days in a demo studio is equivalent of buying a studio now.
Right.
So it's quite a different world, and it's a wonderful world. I think that democratization of the music industry has been a blessing, a curse for some people. I think for some of the old rock stars that were maybe used to huge sources of income, in some ways maybe it's affected them more than others. I don't know. That's a whole other 5-hour conversation that I should probably never even mention, because we'll get into that. But the reality is like the playing field is leveled. It really just comes down to creativity now.
Right. It's as important to figure out how you're going to get the music out there and where it's going to go and how you will find the ears for it as the actual production of the music.
Yes, I do think that's a very valid and huge conversation. I think I can definitely speak quite well to lots of those aspects because I've been in all those situations. Mm-hmm. I've had 5 record deals, and 2 of those bands that I had record deals with, I was the producer, the engineer, the musician, and the songwriter that got them signed. So, and I've developed and got a lot of bands signed as well, and some have gone on to be quite successful. So I feel like I never personally had any experience where it was like being plucked out of obscurity and dumped into a big pile of money. I think that's the old wives' tale of the music industry, mm-hmm. that people used to just kind of get plucked and dropped into megastardom. It was always up to the artist to really suit up and show up. If I had $1 for every artist that shot themselves in the foot, I'd be far richer than the ones that kind of got messed over. It's the music industry is what is that quote? That actually is a film industry that gets used a lot. A dark and barren corridor or something like that, where good men run like whatever, and then there's the
bad side.
Then there's the bad side. Yeah. So I think that I really believe that anything in the arts, if you want to do this and you are passionate and you love this and you are uncompromising, then you will do well. Right. I watched that in particular. We just interviewed Brandi Carlile, and I think the video will probably already be out by the time this comes out, because I think it comes out tomorrow. And Brandi, I saw her come into my studio in 2001, I think, mm-hmm. as an uncompromising artist that had the twins, as they're called, playing with her. And she had this phenomenal voice and this incredible rare talent that very few people have. And all the chatter around her was like, yeah, we just need to like put her in with all these writers. She needs to go in with all the big writers and then we'll turn her into a megastar. And she never let that happen. And now look at her, and she pretty much rules the world. I mean, she's an amazing producer. She's killing it. Mm-hmm. She's everywhere. She's one of the finest voices ever, let alone of our time. And so I think being passionate and uncompromising and hardworking cannot be underestimated.
Right.
I get a lot of, I say things like that, and then a lot of people push back and say, luck. I don't know what that is because I've always had to personally felt like I have to work twice as hard as the person next to me to get it, and I don't have a problem with that anymore.
Right. I mean, that's the side you don't see, right?
It's the side you don't see.
Yeah. Last weekend I was down in Indianapolis for a music festival down there called the All In Festival, and we interviewed a number of the artists, some up and coming and some more established. And interesting talking to them about the music scene today, because this one has 1 million streams, and this one has 2 million and 3 million and 8 million and so on. And so you ask those kind of questions, and it's never luck. It's mm-hmm. always, we worked really hard. We made sure. the music we wanted to make, and we found our audience. And it's that kind of a thing that happens.
There was a study that the BBC was talking about a couple of months ago where people gravitate towards the story of some kind of level of genius, and it just plucked. People like those stories more than they like hearing that you have to work hard.
Well, of course, yeah. Of course, yeah.
And I think the problem is there's a lot of people that get successful and they're being interviewed on TV or whatever, and the interviewer's trying to find those kinds of stories because it's more sensational. I'm blanking on the name of the actor, but there's this really the Guardians of the Galaxy actor. What's his name? Chris Pratt. Yeah. So Chris Pratt was being interviewed on, I think it was Letterman or Leno, one of the two, and they interview him and they said, "What was your big break?" And he said, I think he was taking some time out from college or something, and he was in Hawaii, I think, waiting tables. And there was a casting director who sort of like took a liking to him, thought he had great personality, looked great, was like, you should pursue your acting, and gave the card and said, when you get into town, and and the sort of story goes that he goes to LA and starts taking some acting lessons, gives them a call, and now he's Chris Pratt, who's in Guardians of the Galaxy. What they failed to sort of like mention is there was like a 5-year point from getting the card to him actually following through with it, where he took acting lessons and did tons and tons of work, because we want to hear that story.
Right.
We all want to pretend that it was just like, oh my God, Mitch, you're amazing. I want to make you a star.
Right.
That's what we all want to hear.
Oh, sure.
Because it does one of two things. It lets us off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Could never do it. It's just luck. It lets us off the hook. It means we don't have to work hard at something. And I think we all secretly wish for that something magically, win the lottery, all that kind of stuff. Right. And we want to believe that can happen. Mm-hmm. We want to believe that, so between those two things. Yeah, it's a tough one. Because I do believe that good hard work, a positive attitude, being welcoming, bringing people into your environment, building long-term relationships is super, super important. But I also believe that you have to look after yourself, and sometimes you have to sacrifice relationships with people in order to grow and, and do more positive things. It's a balance. Mm-hmm. It really is a balance.
Certainly. Well, that actually leads me to segue to a little bit different twist on that. When did you start the channel?
We started it about, I think it's 8 years this month.
Okay. And so all that it takes to have a successful YouTube channel is an iPhone and make an occasional video, right? That's all.
Sure, yeah. that's what happened.
Is there work involved in that also?
When we first started it, my wife came to me and said, "Hey, you do all of this anyway for people, so why not just do it on camera?" Mm-hmm. That's the dumb explanation of how it came up. She just said, "You're continually answering questions for people." I mean, I was employed as a consultant A&R for 2 different labels, working under an A&R guy that used to send me albums to critique that were being mixed, and I'd give him mix notes, and then he would feed it to the mixer, sometimes even production notes, so that, frankly, he could sound intelligent.
Right.
I remember, I won't say which album it is because people will work out the dynamic. But, yeah, I was giving sometimes people now that are friends of mine, that I've never said to them, but you remember those notes you got? They were from me. But that was part of the job, I was being hired specifically because I, could make albums and stuff like that. So my wife just said, well, let's see if you can do this on a level using YouTube. Mm-hmm. And I was friends with, still am, with Tim Pierce, and he had a channel that had been around for a relatively long time, a few years at that point, not as big as it is now. And, we just kind of put 2 and 2 together and said, well, we should try this. But we didn't monetize for the longest time. There was no money being made. It was just a lot of hard work. We would, I also think my wife had just had our daughter, or was just about to, and I think we were just like, we were still really busy. We were making pretty good money, to be honest. Mm-hmm. It was only a year or 2 after finishing an Aerosmith record. We had done an Ace Frehley record. We had worked with a ton of artists, loads of independent artists, loads of people like Trevor Hall, who we really love. We did some, basically we're busy, really, really busy, doing one-offs with tons and tons of different bands. Still doing the occasional Frey thing. I did a James Blunt single. All of this was going on at the time. So we weren't short of being busy and making good money at a relatively high level with major label stuff still. But I think there was a sense of a sort of writing on the wall, and also going back to the early point, this sort of idea that my journey was what everybody's journey within reason is like now. You know, the sort of do it yourself, make it up as you go.
Right.
And it felt like there was a gap. You know, there still is. I mean, it's still relatively, you know, people that have professional YouTube channels and people that are really busy making music. And there's not many people like myself that actually, you know, have made records that people know that have a YouTube channel as well, because I think it's a lot of work. And for us, it was exhausting. I would start in the morning with Connor. Shout out to Connor, who is from Indiana. And he went to IU, Bloomington, and he was my intern. He had gone to IU, and he got recommended by Michael Stucker, who's a family friend of ours, who's a professor at IU, and said, this kid's good. And he was great. And he came out, and he would meet me at 9 a.m. most mornings before starting sessions at 11, and we'd film a video. And that happened for a good 1 or 2 years with not even putting an ad on a video. Nothing. We just kind of built. First year, we got 10,000 subscribers, and it was really just trickling along. And in the second year, we hit like 100,000. And it was just like, oh, wow. But still, we didn't even have ads on videos. Didn't even think that could make any money. So it was just like, I suppose when you started it from that kind of pretense, you don't have this sort of master plan. You also don't have any cynicism behind it.
Right.
And those videos all still do really, really well. We have some of those videos that have hundreds of thousands of views that are just like talking about basic miking, compression, EQ, mixing bits and pieces. And they were just a lot of fun to do.
Right.
So
those evergreen topics that are always going to do well.
Now I think if you're starting a YouTube channel, you've got the benefit of having so much wealth of videos out there that you can basically redo them. I mean, I see it all the time. I see my videos being redone by other people, and I don't begrudge them that. I mean, it's difficult to come up with new topics all the time. You know, I joke about this all the time. We have 8 videos on mixing low end.
Wow.
And they all have hundreds of thousands of views. You know.
Yeah.
Mixing low end is something people struggle with.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Right. So what's your schedule like these days? What's a normal day like for you?
I don't know if I know what a normal day is. Gosh, what's a normal day? We don't have normal days. Yeah. I mean, you know, because we do so much of this kind of stuff where we travel a lot. You know, we've done a lot of speaking engagements, do some keynotes at universities. Yeah, I don't think there is really a normal day anymore. And we work with a lot of other people like myself that do other channels and stuff. We have a great partnership with Christian Kohler. He and I have the Kohler Audio Cult together, and that's completely built around metal and modern rock mixing and recording. And I sought him out and found him because I realized he was another person of our ilk. He was somebody that actually recorded albums that people knew. That area is very crowded, but most of the people in that world haven't actually recorded anything that anybody's heard. They just more set themselves up as doing that. And I get it. Some people are naturally really gifted on camera. So, you know, all they have to do is find what it is that they can sell their products with, you know. And I've seen some of those people. This is like their fifth enterprise of being an online something or other, you know. Right. Christian wasn't like that. Christian started his thing for exactly the same reasons as I did. Just like, oh yeah, you know, this is what I do. I want to show people what I do. So we found him, we befriended him, and now we have the Kohler Audio Cult together. And it's a lot of fun. He's incredibly talented. Still likes to record things with microphones, but also is aware of virtual amps, you know, drum samples, etc. He has no problem utilizing all of the modern stuff with the traditional stuff and blending it together, which I still think is the best way to make music, you know, use everything. You know, here we are, we're sitting in a beautiful studio in front of a Neve console, a Rupert Neve console, but a Neve console. You know, but we're also aware that we might record the drums here and then stick in a metal kick. Who the heck knows? I mean, in some ways, it's a blessing because we can morph things however we want. It's again, you know, we're in a wonderful time to make music.
So let me ask you this then: given that perspective and given all that you've done, What would you say is the minimum you need to have to make a release level recording?
So I think to get started, you're probably looking at a 2-input interface, a pair of headphones, and at least one microphone.
Mm-hmm.
And the beautiful thing is like industry standards are quite cheap. I don't know what an SM57 goes for these days, but it's the $100-ish, isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe just over, just under, depending on the sales. I mean, that's a way to get started. Mm-hmm. That and a couple $100 interface. And, we were talking about Audio-Technica headphones earlier from like $50 or $60 that sound good. You can get going for like $300 or $400 quite easily.
Right.
And whatever DAW you choose usually comes with a bunch of virtual instruments. So maybe if you're so inclined, you want to get like a little MIDI controller. There's sub $100 MIDI controllers out there, little tiny ones that have pads as well that you can play drum samples off. You can get going pretty cheaply.
Right.
And do it. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
And then if you need to go and record drums, and then you go and hire a friend's studio or find a studio to record drums in. Or you just program it up until the point that you find a drummer in the local area that has their own studio and you collaborate with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think, honestly, that's something I always like to talk about. Collaboration is key. If you want to grow in this business, find other people to work with. And if you can collaborate with them and utilize their skill set, their equipment, their Rolodex, their relationships, and build together. A lot of advice I give to people is, what is your skill set? If you're an amazing guitar player, offer to play guitar on other people's records.
Right.
Record your guitars at home. And once they realize that you can record, maybe they'll say, "Oh, I'm really busy. Can you? My friend John is going to put the bass line down, but I'm mixing something. Can you come over to your house and do the bass?" Mm-hmm. It's just a way to get into it. If you're really good at mastering, then master something. If you're a singer and you're good and you can comp vocals, there's a lot of work for you.
Right.
Comping vocals for some people is like putting an ice pick through your eye. So if you can come along and say, "I'll comp your vocals for you," you just need to get your foot in through the door. You need to build relationships. And it doesn't have to be with famous people. Mm-hmm. It's just about building that circle. When I was a kid, most of my best friends when I was a kid are still my best friends, which is unusual because I was kind of a loner and a weird kid. But I think all my friends were their own versions of loners and weird kids as well, which is what typically happens with, us creative types. And all of my best friends have stayed in music. Mm-hmm. But we didn't grow up together helping each other out. We all kind of went off in different directions. My oldest friend in the world is the drummer for the Sundays. And he went off and had a bunch of hit records in the late 80s and early 90s when he was younger. And another one of my best friends has been front of house for Blur and the Gorillaz since, again, the same kind of period. And these friends have all, and then the drummer from the Sunday's brother is front of house for Susie and the Banshees, also owns studios and builds studios and is an amazing bass player. It's pretty crazy. Mm-hmm. Again, it probably comes back to that music store in our town, but So many of us stayed in music. But none of us have ever I don't think I've ever called any of them and said, "I need a favor." Which is interesting when I come to think of it. We've occasionally done things together, but more coincidentally. I did play in a band with Patch, the drummer of the Sundays, in the mid-late 90s. And we did have a record deal together. We put out 2 singles together. But that came around about in a completely different way. But yeah, I don't remember ever having a phone call where it was like, "I need a favor."
Right.
You just kind of had relationships. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think I'm blessed to have done this, but the biggest blessing is to have a work ethic, and probably another one of the blessings is probably not to have really grown up with very much money, because if I had to succeed in something, it means I had to work a little bit harder. I've said this many times, and all joking aside, my first guitar, my father built for me. With me is a stretch, but for me. And I had friends that would be like, "Daddy, I'd like a new guitar for Christmas." And they'd get a Les Paul Custom.
Right.
Oh, I don't begrudge them that, It's not a precursor to every kid that got a Les Paul Custom for their first guitar is terrible. That's not true at all. But it's definitely it's definitely a bigger story when somebody gets the bare minimum they can get by and persists and works up and sees that Les Paul Custom as kind of a holy grail of something you got.
Right.
Yeah, there's definitely something to it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. It's funny how all of that circles back around, all the different experiences that you have, whether it's, working on your own guitar, teaching yourself to play, teaching yourself to record, and then years later, the way that circles back. I mean, I studied, I was a science fair nerd.
Nice.
In high school. And that whole scientific method and all of the stuff that I learned in those years and a little bit of electronics that I got and things served me now so well. On the technical side of things and troubleshooting and all the things that we do. So you never know. Part of what you're talking about is that network of people, but it's also taking advantage of opportunities when they come up and recognizing those opportunities and being willing to step in and do what's needed to make those opportunities happen.
Yeah, I mean, the classic phrase, isn't it? What luck is the intersection of opportunity and hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the reality. I've messed up opportunities. I look back at some things and went, oh my God,
Right.
I forgot I should have done that, or I didn't show up, or I didn't suit up, or and I've seen people with less work ethic and be successful just by saying yes at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to stay successful, you have to really know what you're doing.
You don't reach the point that you're at and now ease off on the gas.
No.
It's working harder, if anything.
Somebody wrote in and said, how do you get a balance between family and work? And for this person, music was their hobby, which obviously they wanted to, like many people listening to this, want to increase. I'm sure you have so many clients, customers, friends that look at you and go, Mitch, you're so lucky you work in music full time. I've got this great job and I've got a house and a mortgage and my kids and I love my family, but I want music to be more important in my life. I can't find the time and I can't find a way of making that music make money enough for me so I can do less of the job that I'm not as in love with.
Right.
That was the question. That was essentially the question. And I've heard that question being asked of me hundreds and hundreds of times.
Right.
You probably have friends say the same thing.
Same thing, sure.
Yeah. And I had to be really honest. You have to kind of push and pull and fail. I wish I could help somebody out and say, here's the secret formula. There is no secret formula. The secret formula is to do it to the best of your ability and learn as you go.
Sure.
Makes me think of I tell this joke all the time, but it's funny and true. When our son was born, I called Patch, my oldest friend in the world. I've known him since I was 3 years old. I call him up, and he's got a lot of kids.
Mm-hmm.
And by that stage, a lot of kids, and he had them young, so they were all like kind of starting to grow up. And I was just like, oh, wise one, oh, guru of fatherhood. What is the best advice that you could give me on parenting, on being a dad? And he went, ignore everybody's advice. And I think a lot of the time, the best advice I can give on that is, whoever asked that question, and I know it's a question for a lot of people that are asking, you just got to push the boundaries. You've got to work as hard as you can and try to do everything to the best of your ability. And you will get overwhelmed and things will go wrong. That's how you learn.
Right.
That's how you learn. You go, oh, I screwed up on that. I better change this. I didn't do enough of this. I did too much of that. I let that go wrong. And if you're not learning from it, that's the failure.
Right.
Not learning is the failure.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's how you progress and move forward. Right. So I'm going to circle it back around to gear. So we talked a little bit about what you consider the minimum you need to have. A question that I often get, and I'm sure that you get this question as well, is what is the best thing I can choose to upgrade in my studio to make the most difference in both the results and the bang for the buck?
Well, I think it depends. Here's a big one that I think came up about 3 or 4 years ago for me. I got sent, it was probably a little bit longer, maybe 5 years ago, I got sent an Audient interface. And, Audient. I got sent an Audient interface. Mm-hmm. And I plugged it in, and I was like, wait there. And it's not so much about Audient. I love Audient, so don't get me wrong. But I plugged it in, and I was like, this sounds like my Pro Tools rig. I mean, this sounds like my Avid HD's interfaces. And so I did a sort of null test just for my own edification on my $20,000 rig against this, whatever it was, $300 interface. And to all intents and purposes, it was identical.
Right.
So what I learned was my 10-year-old Pro Tools system, which was fantastic and all singing and all dancing. Obviously, it's now like 15, 20 years old, but at that point it was like 10 years old. Was completely and utterly equaled by something a fraction of the cost. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest things you could do is if you've got very, very old equipment that was very, very expensive, is be open to the idea that you can better it now for a fraction of the cost.
Right.
So sometimes an upgrade is not... I used to spend $20,000 on stuff, I got to spend it again. And interface-wise, so what happened is I then thought to myself, well, okay, I've got a whole bunch of M boxes and stuff from like 98, to 2004,
Mm-hmm.
You remember the Digi 001s
Sure.
and the O2s and all that kind of stuff. And I was like thinking, well, I wonder if this is as good as the HD systems of that period, which were like the pinnacle.
Yep.
How are those comparatively inexpensive ones? And I checked that out, and that was startling. It was startling. They just weren't that good. Mm-hmm. So if you've got an equivalent of a $300 interface back in from 2002, great. I mean, if it's all you love and you know how to work it, I'm just telling you now, 20 years forward, it is night and day.
Yeah.
Night and day. And I've asked every single one of them, all the companies, Audient, Focusrite, blah, blah, blah. You name the companies, I've talked to all of them. And they're all like, yeah, everybody uses the same chipset now. Mm-hmm. And it's all about the electronics that goes around it, all of which has just grown and grown and got better and better. So the access you have now for quality recording is a fraction of the cost. So if you're going to upgrade something, look at some of your old digital stuff.
Okay.
I think that's an inexpensive way of just jumping up.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention like the Audient in particular, not to sing their praises, but their mic pre's are so clean. It's tough to beat it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm looking here at a lot of external stuff, and as anybody's ever watched my videos, I have a lot of external pre's. I've got Neves, I've got BAE, obviously, I've got APIs, I've got the BAE APIs. You name it, I've got it. I RCAs and bloody blahs and Ampegs and Ampegs. I do have Ampegs, but Ampex. Every single thing, everything you've got here. I've got Marg, I've got Chandler. I've got all that, and I love all those flavors, and I will never get rid of them. I'll take them to my grave, or when I drop dead, my wife will sell them. But the point is like, I love all of that, but the fact that you can buy interfaces now that have clean pre's, and you've got these things called plugins that can now color it, you can do things that are so incredible for a fraction of the cost. Mm-hmm. So, long answer, biggest, quickest, easiest upgrade, gun to my head, would be look at your interface. How old is it? Is it hitting that 15, 20-year mark? Upgrade it.
Time to upgrade, yeah.
Upgrade it, because the difference between an interface from 15 or 20 years ago to now is not even night and day. It's like freaking, I don't know how to exaggerate it, because when I went back and tested my older units that I did make records on as well, I was like, oh, geez, these aren't even close to what people do now.
Right.
And think other than that, if you're not talking about just gear, but you're a studio environment, ring out your room, start figuring out what's going on. One of the best things from becoming friends with you guys was you introducing me to Gavin Haverstick, who is one of the nicest guys on the planet, who's very generous with his time and his knowledge. And, he helps so many people. We got an email from a woman a couple of days ago, Lucy, who is designing a studio in, I believe, on the East Coast. And we hooked her up with Gavin. And Gavin has just been incredible and instrumental in helping. They have an architect help building this thing. She's a multi-Grammy award-winning children's music composer. Mm-hmm. And he's just rolling up his sleeves. He has nothing to gain other than being really good, really talented, doing the right thing, building a great, clean, wonderful reputation. And people like that really opened my eyes up to just some of the simple things you can do. The stuff we did in our studio in our old house was all done with off-the-shelf stuff that we got from you guys.
Right.
And the difference was remarkable.
Yep.
Absolutely remarkable. And a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
And Gavin will ring out the room and tell you what to do. You just send him photos, give him the dimensions. They'll be like, do this, this, and this. And it is night and day. So even if you don't use Gavin, I don't know, call up Mike Arango. Sorry, Mike. There's plenty of people that I know and trust that will give great advice on how to improve stuff. So probably those are the two number one things that hit me is if you've got old digital equipment, you can definitely upgrade it. Now, don't get me wrong. I love old Lexicon reverbs and things like that. I'm not talking about the vintage stuff. I'm talking about interfaces, the sort of, because that really is pivotal, because that's where everything is going through. And if your converter is really old and not really doing a very good job, that's a number one upgrade for me. But I think parallel to that is getting your room to sound as flat as possible.
Right. So critical.
Because if you get that room sounding pretty flat, you can, like I said, you can put in those, $300 Cali LP6s or that News PreSonus that we really like as well. They're about $4 or $5. I mean, it's ridiculous. Inexpensive speakers in a good sounding room. And the one thing we did that thing with correction software, and we had the Cali LP6s, we had the Foco Trio 11s, and the Genelec 1032s, and we rang them all out, and it was remarkable how close they all sounded with correction software.
Right.
And the price differential between like $300 and $10,000, how close we could get them.
Pretty amazing.
It's a whole new world.
Those are the two, in addition to the interface electronics, which there's so much been happening under the hood that we don't see, but when you plug in, you can hear it. Those two ends of the chain, the monitors, and the other end being microphones. There have been such dramatic improvements in those in the last 5-10 years and continue.
It's stupid with mics, isn't it? It's no secret that the 640 TS, I believe, is one of the best microphones to be designed. I know Al Schmidt and all of those guys were flipped out when they first heard that mic. It is a ridiculously transparent mic that you can run. That's the Lewitt 640 TS. I had Ryan ask me a top 5 mics, and I was like, that's my number one mic. It's not to say that I don't love other mics, but that's the kind of innovation that I like. A microphone that you can adjust the polar pattern after recording, but because it's like two capsules glued together perfectly, the phase is impeccable, and you can get the best stereo you've ever recorded. And I believe it's like $699, which is not cheap, but it's not expensive for a mic of that quality. And yeah, I'm loving stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm loving it. And there's so many, I don't want to just give one microphone company a shout out. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's realizing that because digital is so dominant and can do so many things, you better start making sure that your microphones you design or any piece of equipment, if it's hardware, it can do a lot. That microphone does a lot. The Atlantis, the Lauter mic with all of those settings, it's like literally having like 8 different microphones in one microphone,
right?
That are so varied and just beautiful. And then at the even higher end of the spectrum, sorry everybody, I'm getting expensive, the Chandler Red mic is just ridiculous.
It's crazy, yeah.
It's crazy. Put it up against a vintage 47, you're like, yeah, it can do that, but it also can do even more. The saturation that it has built into it is so remarkable and so interesting. So it keeps all of us, people that love making music happy, because we can, if we want to do something traditional, we can buy a microphone like that gives us all of the classic sounds that we grew up on and love, but also does so much more. And then, of course, the other end of the spectrum, you've got, Slate.
Right.
Yep. And, of course, UA, since they bought the Townsend mic.
Yep.
That's remarkable. So with the Slate, I did a shootout with my C12 and their C12. And, look, I love C12s.
Right.
But not many people are spending over $30,000 to get a vintage C12, and nor should they, to be quite frank, unless they're microphone collectors and have a huge studio and want to show off their prowess and their spending ability. And Stevens C12 is as close as it ever needs to be.
Right.
And it's a sub $1,000. And then, of course, the Townsend, I went in with Clay Blair, and I think he had 3 67s, definitely 2, but it was a bunch of 67s up, vintage 67s. And we went through all of the Townsend settings, and I think it's actually Alan Sides, the Ocean Way one. Their 67 and his prize 67, blindfold test, backwards and forwards, which is it? Which is the right one? Stop me when you know it's the right one. I can't do it. It was remarkable. Again, what's a 60s U67 worth?
Yeah, right.
More than most people's cars.
Right.
And here at $1,000, $1,500, you can get Yeah, that and so much more. So yes, I agree. When you're talking about technology and microphones and stuff like that, the fact that you're either getting companies like Lewitt and Loughton and others, I don't want to just single out those companies, but so many companies that are pushing boundaries of hardware ones, and then you've got these digital, emulations that are being incorporated in. I mean, when I was a kid, you had a U87, you had a 57, and then you had this awful C1000, AKG C1000. Do you remember that microphone? Uh-huh. And if you want to make it hyper, you took this little piece of plastic and screwed it over the top of the capsule.
Right.
I mean, God bless AKG. They were trying. At least they made a microphone that was more affordable.
a ton of recordings using that microphone.
Yeah, and so did I. So, but the fact that was as good as it got, and that was like still £300 when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, that was like a day in a studio,
Mm-hmm.
£300 when I was a kid is probably like $2,000 now, the buying power of what you could get for it now.
Sure.
So we live in such a wonderful, wonderful time.
Right. Well, that's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing some of your experience and your wisdom regarding all those topics, because there's, so many people want to get into content creation. They want to get into YouTube and things, and pulling back the curtain a little bit and realizing there's a lot of work that goes into to doing that, but you can still succeed if you do that work, and if you have a fresh approach, and you have a unique take on your topic.
I think to me, just stay consistent in your messaging. When I'm talking about products and I review them, I'm trying to find the person it's right for.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the thing about the creative arts in general, let alone music, everything. There is no one way to skin a cat, as the old phrase goes. Such a weird phrase, isn't it? But it's what we say. And the reality is that, if I'm 15 and I'm doing modern dance music, I'm not going to want to buy, probably not looking at that beautiful DW Fern mic pre over there. But I might be looking at, a virtual instrument, some kind of saturation, something that's going to mess things up, some, dynamic EQ plugins and stuff like that. Or other things, virtual instruments, you name it.
Right.
I might be looking at that world. I'll be looking at value for money products that can get me making music pretty easily. But at the same time, I have no problem with, reviewing something that is a plugin that's got some crazy multi-effects that would never work in organic music. The person that's buying the DW Fern is probably recording beautifully recorded analog musicians sitting in that room over there playing great stringed instruments, whatever the heck it might be, and that is the perfect thing for the job. So for me, it's like you can be a niche, because people always say, how does your channel, and it's collective, it's me and my wife, but it's other people that we brought in as well. How does it have such high subscriber count, compared with some of these other people that have really good views on their videos, but they can't seem to get the same kind of level of subscribers? And I say it's because we cater to everybody. And it's always been the mission. We're not a niche. We don't go, we're only metal. We don't go, we're only EDM. We don't go, we're only country. We don't go, we're only gospel. We don't go, we're only worship music. We don't go, we're only punk. We cover it all. Because to me, that's what makes music so incredible. Now, if you're starting a channel, and that's a good question, you can find a niche, and there is a way to do it. And I think almost all actually YouTube channels that do what we do are in a niche. And that's absolutely fine. But that wasn't really my mission. And also wasn't my love. You heard when we were getting set up, I was going between kind of new wave, prog rock, and classical.
Yep.
And there's a couple of other genres. If we'd been going, I could go on for further. I could have put on John Martin, some folk from the early 70s. I'm happy with it all. And when I was a teenager, and in my 20s during the 90s, I DJ'd. I used to crank Left Field and Orb and all that stuff. And Massive Attack is still some of my favorite bands. To me, it's all one big melting pot. As I always tell people, the week after we did our Dwayne Allman video, which got like 250,000 views, I did Fela Kuti. And I talked about Afrobeat. Right. Where does Afrobeat comes? It comes from Fela Kuti. And to me, that's what it's all about. I want to speak and bring people together, because without blues and without African music, you and I are not here talking through these microphones about anything,
Right.
And so to me, it's like I have to all connect it all back. And I remember just being a little kid and loving loving Queen. And the great thing about Queen in that period, when you listen to like Bohemian Rhapsody, is go off into prog world. So yeah, I bought early Genesis and Crimson and Caravan and Camel and Can and all of that started. And when I got into Can, I'm like, oh no, I'm into German krautrock, and suddenly I'm listening to Tangerine Dream and Neu and Kraftwerk and all this stuff. And then of course Depeche Mode, like, oh, they all listen to that, and New Order and Joy Division. So there's all one scene going that direction. But then of course you got this sort of neoclassical thing, and the point is like, and then I'm listening to Brian May bend notes with incredible vibrato. I'm like, where does that come from? And then I read that he loves Rory Gallagher. And the reason why he actually plays an AC-30 is because he saw Rory Gallagher live. Right. So I go out and buy the Irish, people will know this if they're Rory Gallagher fans, I think it's called the Irish Tour. It's got the Chrome album. I go out and buy that. And I'm listening to him doing some blues covers. So I go out and I start finding blues. God bless it. It's all just one big, beautiful melting pot.
That's the joy of music.
It is,
right? Is following those we'll call them rabbit holes.
I love it.
You follow, or trails. We'll call them rabbit trails, not rabbit. Yeah. And it's one of the things I actually love about the streaming services. We can have a whole conversation about streaming services and things, but I like nothing better than sitting down with Tidal on. And
Tidal's good at it.
And going through the related stuff and digging deeper and deeper and going further
Tidal
and further.
is very well curated.
Yeah.
Pandora not.
Some are better than others, but you can still you can still chase those different threads and find all this amazing music that you wouldn't otherwise discover. So
I agree,
and that's why we're here.
I agree. I love it all, and I always I'll finish with this. I always feel like one of the perfect years for music is probably the most ignored. Is like 1980. Like no, punk rock was 76. Summer of Love was 67. We all know these pivotal moments that changed music. Well, 1980, Queen put out The Game. Queen fan, so I'm going to go back to that. The Game, what's the genre on The Game? Is it like Dragon Attack, which is like kind of what they've been doing, take me to the that's kind of big drum sound, kind of John Bonham drum sound with heavy rock guitar, great. Is it like Save Me and Play the Game, which is very like huge background vocals, or is it Crazy Little Thing Called Love?
Right.
Is it 50s rockabilly?
Yep.
Or is it And the One Bites the Dust, a disco track? That to me that's what I love. To me that goes back to Revolver,
right? Where
you've got We'll Live in a Yellow Submarine, or Taxman, which is like basically sounds like indie rock, or Here, There, and Everywhere, or Good Day Sunshine with horns, or is it Eleanor Rigby with just a string quartet? That's what I love.
Yeah. Fantastic. Warren, thanks so much for sitting down with us today. It's been a pleasure to have you here on the Plugged In podcast.
Always wonderful talking to you.
Yeah, well, this is the first time we've really sat down on air, as it were, and had a conversation like this. So.
Well, edit me to make me sound smart. So it's going to be a very, very short podcast.
Every word is brilliance. Simply brilliance. Let's do it again soon.
Yes, please.
I'd love to do more.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed this installment of the Plugged In podcast by Sweetwater. Special thanks to Warren Huart for taking time out of his very busy schedule making content here at Sweetwater to sit down with us for this interview. Now, videos from his visit at Sweetwater have already posted to his Produce Like a Pro channel, and we've already posted some to Sweetwater's YouTube channel as well. Be sure to check those out. And we also want to give big thanks to the amazing team in Sweetwater Studios for hosting this interview. Remember to start at sweetwater.com for all your music instrument and pro audio needs. And while you're there, you can also check out Sweetwater Studios and all the events taking place there. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mitch Gallagher, and this has been the Plugged In podcast by Sweetwater.